Okay, hi all. I'm Dan Floyd, coach with England Athletics and runner myself, and I'm here with Matt Long. Matt, do you want to just quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm delighted that you've asked me to support with this, Dan. Look forward to talking to you a little bit about a very illustrious career of an athlete. Steve Binns, a Commonwealth silver medalist. And I'm here to talk to you in my capacity as a coach for South Derbyshire Roadrunners, Birmingham University Athletics Club, and also Birchfield Harriers.
Brilliant. Yeah, so just as Matt's just said, we're here to discuss the Catch Me If You Can article that Matt and Karen both wrote and published in the Fast Running magazine. If you want to have a look, anybody watching this video, please just go to the fastrunningmagazine.com website and you'll see the post up there. The article is about the 10,000 meter race with Steve Binns, and me and Matt are just going to both talk through it. So for anybody who's seen the video, I'm just going to briefly tell you what I've seen. So the video is actually available on YouTube if anybody wants to re-watch that. But basically, in my view, and Matt, I'm going to come on to some questions about it shortly. We're not going to digress into the actual race itself, but we'll go into some of the sort of the training structure that you wrote in your article. But for anybody who hasn't seen it, basically, Steve Binns made a bit of a break quite early on in the race. Solly was just behind him, and then with, I think it's 520 meters to go, that's sort of written in the article as well. Solly takes the lead. Steve Binns tries to catch or stay with him, tries to keep up, but drops back a little bit and then surges forward and makes quite a sort of miraculous recovery on the coming around the last I think the last 200 meters. He makes a good recovery and catches back up with Solly. And the times, if you want to know the times they finished, just go into that article that Matt's written, and it's all in there. But what would your reflection be on the actual race itself, Matt? Have you got any reflections on that?
Well, I remember that championships. Let's remind listeners that we're talking about the 1986 Commonwealth Games, which were very much seen as a home games because they're in Edinburgh, they're in Scotland, and of course my heroes, or two of my heroes, namely Steve Cram, won the 800, the 1500 meters, and Steve Ovett, it was his swan song. He came back after a disastrous Los Angeles Olympics and won the 5000 meters in Edinburgh. And I just think it's incredible that we were so good. England and Great Britain were so good in that era that when you've got guys like John Solly, who was English and won the gold in that 10,000 meters, Steve Binns got the silver. A legendary runner called Steve Jones, a Welshman that went on to break the world marathon record and win the London Marathon, of course, he was third. And it's very easy to forget the second places, the Steve Binnses of the world, and the third places, because we lived in that superstar era of Coe, Ovett and Cram. But let's not forget, we had Steve Binns, we had John Solly, we had Jack Buckner that won a European title that year. We had Tim Hutchins that medalled in both the Commonwealth Games and the European Championships. So we had a plethora of talent. So I think it's very easy to forget just how gifted those guys were.
Yeah, definitely, and it's certainly very, very gifted and talented runners. So, but on that, sort of as a recreational runner, which both myself and you are, and lots of people that are going to be listening to this video, we're all recreational runners. We've all got full-time jobs, and we're trying to manage our jobs around trying to run at the same time. There's some key points in the article for me. One of the things, 50 to 60 mile week. That's where I think it says that's where he found that he had a bit of a talent, effectively. So 56 miles is a lot of miles to run in a week.
It is, and the caveat would be, don't immediately try and run 50 or 60 miles a week if it depends on your training age, how many years that you've been active within the sport. So it would be a disaster if you were, you've only had 6 months in the sport, if you tried to jump up to running 50 or 60 miles a week. Mileage isn't important, but aerobic capacity and aerobic development is. So I think that what you need to think about is energy systems, which we'll come on to in a bit. You need to be thinking that the majority, not all, but the majority of your work, around about 70 to 80% of your work, needs to be aerobically dominant. So that might include steady state running, of which Steve Binns did a lot as an international athlete, but he didn't start at 50, 60 miles a week, I can assure you. It might have been 20 or 30. But you can also build your aerobic capacity through non-weight bearing activities, particularly swimming, particularly running. And I think it's fascinating again, I know the club that you coach with, and one of the coaches that I coach at, South Derbyshire, you know, we've got a massive amount of triathlon based athletes, haven't we, as well, which I think is significant. They have a tremendous aerobic capacity, so they might not need to run 50 or 60 miles a week if they're doing several hours of swimming a week, or they're on the road 3 or 4 times a week on their bike. So I think that the answer to your question is not how many miles you do, but it's how you build your aerobic energy system. Some of it will be weight bearing through steady running. Some of it will be through other sports. I've mentioned just 2.
That's exactly it. And I think for me also, and your article again also mentions it, is the mixed mechanical loading. So it's not just about going out and doing, I don't know, 60 miles on the road. You know, going out and running on the grass, for instance. In my training, I do run some high mileage weeks, up to 60, 70 miles a week is what I do in my training occasionally. But that wouldn't necessarily be on the grass. And I've got athletes that I've coached as well. And I always try to say to them, you know, try and run on mixed terrain. Don't just run on the road. Try and get on the trails. Try and get on the grass. Keep the impact as low as you possibly can. But also, it's good to mix things up rather than just getting into that routine of doing the same thing every day. It's not good.
It is. And of course, by running on the trails, by running on the grass, I mean, I spoke to a very famous marathon runner called Paul Evans, who finished 3rd in the London Marathon, 2nd in the New York Marathon, and won Chicago in 1997. And it surprised me that the majority, as a road runner, it surprised me that the majority of his mileage was done on the trails near his home in Norwich. And he would tell me about how he did it deliberately, because it would build up his core strength and stability, because of the kind of, you know, you're working in that kind of transverse plane. It's the lateral demands on your, you know, slipping, twisting, turning. The lateral demands on your body are that much greater to propel you forward if you're slipping from side to side. That, you know, he felt that it was a more valuable form of all-round training. But I think the caveat to that is it goes against the Strava culture, if you get what I mean by that, because if you're going to work out, as myself and an athlete are from South Derbyshire tomorrow, if you're going to work out on grass or on trails, you've got to run to feel, rather than the stopwatch. So if I'm going to do a session tomorrow, which is based around a progression run, it might be me running to feel at half marathon pace, then 10 mile pace, then 10K pace, 5K pace. I can't be slavish to the stopwatch. And athletes sometimes miss the difference between kind of target pace and what Arthur Lydiard, the late great Arthur Lydiard, would have called, you know, feel pace, running to feel.
Yeah, actually, just on that running to feel pace and perceived effort, I suppose there is that Strava culture of going out and running as fast as you can. Certainly at the moment, with the restrictions that are in place, it's a lot of people go out and they run these Strava segments. And I'm you know, a typical example is, you know, people go out and try and run as fast as they can over a Strava segment. But actually, is that towards your training plan? Is that towards your training goals in the future, or is it just a short-term hit? And actually, something a very well-known sort of coach said to me once was, go out and run without your watch. Just take your watch off and just go and run. You just go for a run of 40 minutes and see how you feel, or half an hour and just see how you feel with no watch on. See how comfortable you are. So off the back of what you've just said, something that I would like to, all the listeners out there, something that I'd like to task them with is go out and have a run, take your watch off and just set yourself a goal and say, I'm going to run for 30 minutes and see how you feel. Don't record it, don't put it on Strava. It's a strange feeling, but
and this isn't, I've mentioned kind of coaches that won't, you know, some people will go, well, who the hell was Arthur Lydiard? But if just to use a couple of famous examples of Arthur Lydiard's kind of students, if you like, people that were influenced by that great New Zealand coach that spoke about running to feel. If you look at people like Lorraine Moller, who was a 4-time Olympic marathon representative, who won the Olympic bronze medal at the marathon in Barcelona. If you look at Rod Dixon, that won another New Zealander that won the Olympic bronze medal in 1972 over 1,500 meters, and then went and ran and won the New York Marathon. Those athletes will tell you that, you know, they always ran to feel. And these guys were running, the Rod Dixons were running in the 3:30s for 1,500 meters, you know, around about 2:10, for the marathon, 2:09:2:10. Lorraine Moller. These are athletes that would be, world class today. So this is not kind of saying, oh well, society's move on. You need a watch. These guys will be telling you to run to feel. So at the elite end, there are still athletes that do that all the time, that discard the stopwatch.
And I think sometimes, bringing that back into the energy systems, actually, it gets a bit confusing, because, a lot of people will go out and they'll do what their watch is, they're looking at their watch and they're saying, okay, I'm going out for a steady run. And they're looking at the watch thinking, well, this isn't steady because I want to run X, Y, and Z for my 10K time. And, even recreational runners, they look and say, okay, I want to run a 7-minute mile for my 10K. Every mile I want to run 7-minute miles. So they think then that their easy runs should be 7-minute mile, but that's not the case.
That's certainly not the case, because what they're missing is they're relying on an extraneous kind of variable for feedback rather than listening to the intuition of their inner self. They're not listening to their bodies enough.
And with running, we probably know all too well ourselves, and the athletes that we've coached as well have seen this. It's not just about the pace that we're running. Sometimes that can be affected by eating. It can be affected by other factors out there. Even even the air temperature, that can affect how our pace. We might not be able to get to our 10K pace on that day because of lots of other factors. Stress, another really big example of that.
You're right. Yeah, you're dead right, Dan. Yeah.
So yeah, free energy systems. We've touched on that a little bit. I just wondered if we could, or if you'd be able to just quickly explain what the 3 different energy systems are.
Well, you've got your aerobic energy system, which is what I'm using right now. It basically means with oxygen. That is the energy system that you would use for an endurance-based event. If you're doing a 10K, a half marathon, a marathon. Then you've got, at the other end of the spectrum, you've got what I would call your stop-start energy system, which tends to last for around about up to 10 seconds. That's called your alactic system, the ATP CP system. That's Usain Bolt, who I saw in Berlin running 9.58 seconds for 100 meters, not needing to breathe. And then you've got your middle system, which is your linking energy system, called the lactate energy system. Some people still use the term anaerobic energy system. That system is where lactate is the good guy. People always use an outmoded term, lactic acid. Lactate is the good guy. Lactate can be used to fuel your energy around your body. It's when it splits up and acidifies that it becomes the bad guy. So the lactate is the good guy. The acid that you feel when you run a 400 meters or an 800 meters flat out, or you're part running, you're busting to get a PB and you sprint the last 250 meters, that feeling of sick in your stomach, that burning sensation in your legs, that's the bad guy, that's the acid. So the lactate system is where you begin to work without oxygen, and the byproduct is the acid, the acidification of your muscles.
Yeah, and so just moving on, and how we can bring that into our own running, and how people watching this video can bring that in. So we spoke about the aerobic type activities, whether that's cycling or just going out for some steady runs. How would we work on those other energy systems? What type of sessions could we use?
Yeah, so I think the alactic system is a system that you can use regularly. For example, if you're warming up, you should maybe think about, before a race, doing a primer, a long extended kind of relaxed sprint. Strides before you do a part run of up to 10 seconds, because if you're exceeding 10 seconds, you're then risking that acidic build up in your legs. A steady run, if I do a steady run myself, I will still put 3 or 4 strides in, probably like yourself at some point near the end of a run, just to get my legs turning over, just to increase my stride length and my cadence a little bit. And I'm not risking fatigue because I'm not doing those strides for more than 10 seconds. So it really is a misconception that if you're doing lots of steady running, that you'll go stale. As long as you put those alactic short strides in at some point of the session, then you're okay. So lactate energy, the lactic system's a bit more complicated, because then you're into the realms of interval training and repetition training. Repetition training tends to be where we have relatively short repetitions with a long passive recovery. We associate that with the development of speed endurance. Interval training is where we tend to have efforts which where the focus is on what we do in the interval. That might be a far more active roll-on recovery. So that will build not only the lactic energy system, but that will build your aerobic base. But the moral of the story is that if we try and overstress the lactate system, first of all, our performance will decline because you can only build the lactate system basically maxes out after about 6 weeks of effort. That's why track runners build themselves in a season towards the peak for running 800 or 1500, because that lactate system maxes out after you've intensely trained it for 6 weeks. After that time, you'll begin to lose form. You may get injured. So it's very, very important that you're careful about how much and when you do that lactate training, when you do those hill sprints, when you do that track session is very, very important.
Yeah, I'm just going to roll back slightly into a question that I get asked quite a lot is what is a stride? And a lot of the athletes come and say to me, okay, what is actually a stride? How should I do a stride properly?
Well, again, I would say a stride is what I would call a relaxed sprint. You know, it's where you're running tall, where you're running proud, where your knees are lifting, where your arms are driving, but there's no tension in your system. So I will often, as a coach, when I see athletes at Birmingham University and Birchfield, particularly doing strides, shout to them, give them the verbal cue, relax, relax, relax. So I do want to see them operating at that kind of pace, but I don't want to see people straining. So a relaxed sprint would be another way of putting it.
And for me, it's also very short. So we're not sprinting over 400, 500, 600 meters. It's more of a sprint over 100 meters. It's just getting up to pace and then dropping off again. That's kind of how I see it.
Yes, and you regularly see world-class athletes like Mo Farah. You know, you go to a Diamond League in Birmingham, or watch the Olympics on the telly. You'll see athletes being allowed out onto the track. They've been held in a warm-up area, a call room for 40-odd minutes. They're moving around, trying to keep warm. And as soon as they're let out onto the track, they'll do about a 60-meter stride, and then an official will be halfway down the back straight, stopping them run any further. They wouldn't want to run any further. They're just short strides, around about 60 meters on average.
Yeah. So just jumping around a little bit, but jumping, I suppose, forward into what you were talking about a second ago about the sessions. What Steve Binns said that one of his favorite sessions is the pyramid session. As a coach, and maybe I can talk about one of my favorite sessions that I like to put athletes through in a moment, but as a coach, what would be your favorite pyramid session?
Well, rather than let's just talk rather than a specific session. Let's talk about the philosophy of pyramids. I would go to the late great founder of the British Milers Club, Frank Horwell, who spoke about multi-pace training. So the idea of a pyramid would be to run at a variety of perhaps aerobically dominant paces, you know, Steve Binns would. So it's to avoid being locked into any one pace. Is the ethos of a pyramid session. So probably like yourself, I've done pyramids according to time, you know, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I've done pyramids according to distance, you know, 200, 400, 600, 800 and back down again. It isn't really important whether it's time or distance. Again, like with all modes of interval training, it's what you do in the interval that matters. Is it a passive recovery? Are you just walking? Are you jogging? Or are you, as I suspect Steve Binns did a lot of the time, are you rolling on? Are you almost continuing a steady run and then into your next effort? And how you manipulate your recovery, the more passive a recovery is, the more you can put the work into the effort, you know, on the pyramid, which will work your lactate system. You can run harder. But the more active your recovery is, the more you are therefore automatically controlling the pace of your interval. You know, you are making it more aerobic because it's more of a continuous cycle. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. So we sort of, I suppose, going back to the article does say that Steve Binns liked to do the pyramid type sessions, and you've just said that as well. And the questions of self-reflection, and I'm just going to really quickly touch on this just due to time, but I suppose one of the items of self-reflection was, when and how would we structure our, I suppose, training? And at what point would you typically want to do a pyramid session of the training cycle?
Well, again, you could let's if I were to do a pyramid session with a group of athletes at South Derbyshire or Birmingham or Birchfield, this time of the year, let's I mean, the pandemic has ruined everything to do with periodization, but this time of the year, an athlete would traditionally be looking to build their aerobic base. So let's take a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 pyramid on minutes. I would be therefore keeping the recoveries relatively short but active. 1 minute recovery, 90-second recovery, but making sure athletes are jogging during that recovery to build their aerobic system. So the pace of the efforts would be slower than it would be in the summer because we're building the aerobic base. That 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 pyramid in the spring, when we're maybe going to try and improve the lactate system, where we're going for a 5K PB or a track-based PB, I may be saying, well, let's have 3 minutes passive recovery in between each effort, because I want you to be able to dip into that lactate system. I want you to get lactate being used as a productive source around your body, and you will feel the acid in your legs and you will be out of breath. Therefore, if you're going to run that much faster and harder on the actual pyramid itself, the recoveries need to be more passive. So again, it's the question is, look at how you utilize the mode of recovery, both in terms of time and also on a scale of active to passive. How active or passive is it?
Okay, I think that's it for me, really. I don't suppose you've got any questions that you want to ask me, really?
Yeah, I think thanks for giving us the opportunity to recall and recapture the kind of career of Steve Binns. Again, one of the problems that athletes, or traps that athletes fall into, is they simply look at a session and try and replicate it. Oh, this is what Steve Binns said. This is why I don't like to be prescriptive about sessions, because it's not athlete centered. If we tried to do, well, perhaps not you, but if I tried to do what Steve Binns did and his pyramid, I think I'd end up in hospital. So always adapt the principle behind the training rather than looking at a schedule that you'll find in a magazine which says do this session, do that session. It's the philosophy behind the session which matters, and that's where you come in as a coach, and hopefully where I do, Dan, to say, okay, you've seen what Steve Binns has done, you've seen what this famous runner's done, but we're all going to end up in hospital if we try that. Let's tailor it, that principle, to your needs.
That's exactly it. Sometimes it's about more recoveries or whatever that person, and I suppose it's all about the level of that particular runner. We're not all at the same level as Steve Binns, so we need to adapt it to whatever level that we're at. And most of us are recreational runners, so we just need to bring that down a bit so we don't end up in hospital. No, I think it was really good, really useful. So thank you. And if anybody does want to read the article, it's within the magazine Fast Running by Matt Long and Karen Buck. So feel free just to head over there and have a look and drop us any questions in the comments. Thanks all.